So Raptors, they're here. They're back. And let's just be honest. The hype for this team has been pretty muted. And I know from, like I said, I follow every sport, so I don't get to watch a ton of the preseason games, but I follow along with what was going on. I was like, oh, okay, McDaniels is looking good for them. And I listened to Darko on your show yesterday talk about how they're going to, it's tough to be Darko in the NBA. Like it's, but I don't want to say Coach
There's
Rag,
even like an analytics projection system called Darko, and it's for Milicic, and it spells out, whatever, regressed, whatever.
He's got to have something else. He's a bit of a rebrand for him because.
Yeah, and even like Rajakovic, like everyone's brain is going to go to Stojakovic.
Yeah, it's too much.
Hit the pager like I play with Stojakovic.
It's too many things. So yeah, I've been calling him Darko, and it's just but then you got to explain it to other NBA people where you're like, Darko with the Raptors. They're like, Darko played for the Raptors?
Yeah.
No, he'll be the new Darko. So they've had a successful preseason. I think that there's a little bit more buzz just with a new coach, knowing that they're going to go to 10 guys. I heard him on your show yesterday saying that they don't want to play anybody 38 to 40 minutes. Barnes looked good in the preseason.
Real good. Yeah.
Which is always, it's better than not looking good in the preseason.
He did not look great last preseason, so.
Exactly. I would rather have a player look good in the preseason than not. I'm not taking too much from it. But let's just start with this. What's the biggest story of the season to you? Like what is going to be the thing that you care most about with this version of the Toronto Raptors? Because I think a lot of people are very curious what that actually is going to look like.
Yeah, look, this is it's an interesting season because on the court and with the personnel and a new head coach, I do find them really interesting. I think it's going to be fun to cover them day to day. It's going to be fun to get into the kind of nitty gritty of what they're trying to do and who's developing how. But big picture, the number one story around this team is the future of Pascal Siakam. And it's not just does he sign an extension today or tomorrow or before the deadline or whatever. He is like the piece that will tell us what the Raptors' overall plan is. And we've kind of been waiting for that for a couple years as they slowly transitioned out of the championship core and kept a couple of those pieces. Fred was obviously the biggest domino to fall now in terms of, hey, maybe we're not turning the page, but we're losing a part of this page and we're okay not replacing it, not getting something on the way out. What Pascal Siakam's future is the biggest question this team faces, Masai and Bobby face. Whether it's an extension or re-upping them in the summer, I think not only is it a really big question asset management wise, because you did just lose Fred and you've seen a lot of guys walk for not a big return. But if Siakam gets an extension at some point, I think that tells you a lot about how things are going for this team. So I do think in addition to being this huge strategic piece that'll tell us something about direction, it'll also be a litmus test for how they think all of these pieces are blending together and how, whether Scottie's on a timeline where it makes sense to max Siakam and try to run that out together, whether the chemistry between those two and with Darko is clicking. So as much as anything happens on the court, and obviously on the court informs this stuff, but it's hard not to look like Siakam has a case for like a top 5 Raptor all time at this point with the championship and the longevity when I don't think he's there yet, but like you could make the case for it. And he's headed into unrestricted free agency at a time where like, if they decided to pivot off of that, like there's not enough without him to be like really, really excited yet. So that's where my eyes are. And until an extension happens or until a trade happens, my eyes are going to stay on that because it's the biggest determining factor of what this front office is thinking, and we haven't had an answer on that for a couple of years.
Yeah, so I think overall the direction of the franchise and picking a lane, this is the inflection point. It
has to be.
That's the take.
You have too many free agents for it not to be.
That's what I was going to say. Is I know that a lot of you were thinking that's what you said last year, and that's what maybe even when you and I were doing a show together when we did it 2 years ago, we asked Bobby Webster. Remember, one of our first shows together was, "Hey Bobby, what's the direction of the franchise?" And he's like, we'll see.
Yeah,
that was 2 years ago. So I understand that there's a little bit of, well, this is the last dance for the Toronto Maple Leafs feeling to this, right? Or this is where Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro have pressure on them season. This is different. They're forced into making these decisions. Pascal Siakam is he's going to be an unrestricted free agent.
They only have 6 guys on a contract for next year.
OG, Gary Trent, like the whole team is being determined based on this year. So, that's not even it to me because that's just there. Like, that's the inevitability. That's not even like a story. To me, it's what you said about, does he fit with Scottie Barnes? Mm-hmm. And, okay, you know me. I read into what people say. I'm watching your interview with Coach Darko yesterday. And Will asked him, how do Scottie and Pascal make each other better? And he just didn't go into it. He kind of ducked the question and he started talking about the rest of the team and all the other guys. And this is the big question to me is, can these two guys become a two-headed monster of just constant rim pressure? Because if I'm starting to see Scottie Barnes and Pascal Siakam take turns and a lot of settling for mid-range jump shots, I know it's not working immediately. Like, this has to be constantly one of these guys is at the rim. And I heard you too on your show talking about how Scottie Barnes can be super effective as a roller, and I'm very curious to see if they can make a two-man game out of these two guys.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of 4-4 pick
That's
and
it.
roll, right? And the Raptors have gotten a ton of use over, I mean, really the whole Lowry era and then into the Fred era of like big, small pick and roll. But what you can do with Siakam and Barnes, especially when you have Pirtle on the floor, the spacing's so tight, but the center is going to be guarding Pirtle, right? So you're going to have two wings or forwards guarding Scottie and Pascal.
The problem is you can't stretch Pirtle out to the three-point line.
You can't, but you can have him in the dunker, or you can have him, you can do some screen-the-screener stuff. It's really clunky space-wise.
It's really clunky space-wise.
Weirdly, a thing that you can do, though, with poor spacing, like poor offensive spacing around the perimeter, you can kind of turn that on the defense sometimes by setting your actions lower on the floor so that there's not, like, you were talking about Nurkic. You would have seen it a bunch last night where he screens, and then he re-screens, but it's, like, at the restricted area almost, and there's just, like, no way to recover there. It gets clunky, and, like, Pascal and Scottie would have to hit a lot of those floater range shots, but there's some stuff you can do. But either way, to your point, there's a lot that they can do together offensively. That's not just like, oh, come down the floor and whichever one of them has the better matchup, kick it to them and clear out. Like, there's a lot they could design together, I think.
Yeah, to me, offensively, and I know seems overly simplistic, but what I want to be able to see is that those two guys, that they can play with each other, like that they can have that two-man game together, but that also we see lineups where we've always talked about like Raptors, small ball lineups, whatever. I kind of got to see that this year. Like, I have to be able to see.
I think you're going to see Scottie at the 5, son.
But that's it. I have to be able to see it because when you look at the starting lineup, this is the issue. Raptors were what, 28th last year? I think I wrote it. Yeah, 28th last year in 3-point percentage. How is that going to improve when you have a lineup that has your starting lineup is Dennis Schroeder, Scottie Barnes, and Jakob Pirtle in it?
They shot under 35% in the preseason on threes as well.
And that happened the year before, too. That was a big harbinger of things to come, was the Raptors shot extremely poorly in last year's preseason. It extended into the year.
Last year was in the like, we shoot a lot of threes era. It was the first time a team had finished 500 shooting as poorly on threes as the Raptors did.
Yeah.
Like, you just can't win games at 33.5%.
So that's it to me, is kind of like, how do those guys mesh together, and can they mesh together as both of them basically being a front court with the flexibility of OG being able to defend some of the other team's bigs, right? Like him at the 5 from an offensive standpoint, but OG at the 5 from a defensive standpoint. A bunch of guys like switching out, which, listen, I like having Pirtle on the team. I didn't love the trade. I still don't love the trade. I just thought it was a weird one.
It's separate of the quality of the player, right? Like trading a first-round pick for the right to give Pirtle 4 years, $80 million.
I don't love it. I still don't love it. I'm never going to love it. There's never going to be a case where I end up going back to it. But I think you're going to start Pirtle in games. I wonder if he's going to be closing these games, and if you're looking at a lineup that's going to be involving more of the shooters, because it's an interesting team where you've now got more shooting on the bench, assuming that some of these guys stay healthy. Some of these guys are still usable, right? There's some older dudes that in theory can shoot, but in practice might all be too old and broken down.
Yeah, we'll see with Otto.
Yeah,
but,
and Temple, like, it's just, there's a couple
I don't think Temple's going to play much.
Yeah, you think? It's like, but they have...
When in preseason, he's running the 905 linhead.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's my guy.
Yeah. Okay, guess what? Big win for the guys who cover the team.
Yeah,
because he's
huge.
He's one of the most, quote, easy to talk to
runs
guys.
the union.
Yes, that's what I mean.
All
it's just
sorts of stuff.
What a win for you guys in that regard.
But in terms of closing lineups, I think it is fascinating because I think we know, barring foul trouble, Scottie, OG, and Pascal are going to be on the floor.
Yep.
But you could make a case for Pirtle coming off for Precious with certain defensive assignments. You could make the case for Pirtle coming off and putting Gary Trent in, so you have a little bit more shooting. You could also make the case for Gary Trent to come in over Dennis Schroeder if the game is playing out a certain way and you like Scottie Barnes or Pascal Siakam's matchup and they're looking good as playmakers. It's interesting because for the last couple years, even though the Raptors have had a lot of questions, we generally knew who would close games. It was, health dependent, but it was usually the same 5 guys closing games out when healthy. So this year, I think only 3 of those spots are locked in. And I think, if you have a lead, yes, Jakob Pirtle is your most traditional big man, but depending on the opponent, like being able to switch with OG, Pascal, Scottie, and Precious could be really interesting, right? You could do some stuff there. I don't think Gary's going to be out there in many defense first lineups, but he does have the kind of ball hawk ability. And certainly if you're losing, you need Gary on the floor.
I think closing lineups are going to have to involve one of Grady Dick or Gary Trent.
If you're trailing, for sure.
Yeah, because again, I don't see how the spacing works with Dennis, Scottie, Siakam, Pirtle, and OG.
Well, here, do you want to do one big number? Because it's related to this.
Hit me.
Okay. Do you need to explain to your audience what one big number is?
Well,
or they know?
I was going to say that Blake and I, when we used to do a show together, Blake, every show would come up with one big number that, it was a stat that was very, very telling of a bigger narrative. So what do you have?
94.5.
Okay.
That is how many points per 100 possessions, so the offensive rating that the Raptors had in the half court last year.
Which is, by the way, for people at home, it's not
real
good.
bad.
Yeah.
That's
like even me who watched all the games and who tracked the team last year went, there's absolutely no way that's true.
The only 5 teams worse than them were the 5 worst offenses overall in basketball. And 4 of those 5 were tanking. The other one was the Orlando Magic, who were not tanking.
Trying to be very bad. The other teams were
Houston,
trying.
Charlotte, Detroit, San Antonio.
Yikes.
Yes. And then Orlando, who, we're not outright tanking, but we're not ready to be good yet. The gap between Toronto and the next playoff team was 2.2 points of offensive rating. So that's not huge, but there was a big gap between Toronto and the next worst half-court offense among playoff teams. I think the points for optimism with this team are pretty clear, and I'm very confident this is going to be a top 10 defense, maybe even a top 5 defense.
That's one of my questions. So
I think they have the personnel, and we know they're going to run in transition. They've got the guys for it. That's always what they've prioritized. But last year, the Raptors finished 500 and scraped together an average offense with this bad a half-court offense. It's not sustainable. It doesn't happen. No other team has done it. It's not a way to build your team. So that 94.5 has to be up closer to 97, 98 for this team to have a chance to win enough games.